So a very warm welcome to everyone again. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. May 7th, last week, was the first year anniversary for the Nourishment Project's Voyage of Discovery online presentation. It started with the Silk Road series, the first issue being Flora and Fauna. Since then, there's been 23 presentations. Hopefully, we have shared beauty and perhaps aroused compassion. This is peer-to-peer learning. So it's our anniversary. We celebrate each other. And so for being part of this spiritual kinship, I thank you. A 1-year anniversary's traditional gift was paper and now has become a clock or a watch. So it's a keeping of time. This clepsydra beautifully demonstrates the flowing of time and is apt for today's topic. The Nourishment Project is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that inform this presentation. The Nourishment Project's presentations marry philosophy with science. The philosophy will show up in the following slides. The framework for today is science itself, declaration of a hypothesis, and upon observation to arrive at a conclusion. So the hypothesis. When time manifests itself, it shows up as life. Thereby, time underpins everything. So the existing our observations. Deep time, geological time, began 13.8 billion years ago, where all matter exploded faster than the speed of light from a state of infinite density. The Big Bang Theory. So the term bang is violent, so I prefer to call that event the Great Radiance. Our narration begins after humans enter this cosmic stage around 38,000 BCE, BCE being before current era, with this Paleolithic engraving of a lunar cycle. The lunar engravings, the etchings right there, reminded me of a work of an Indian artist, Jitesh Kalat. He uses the roti, the Indian tortilla, to represent the waxing and waning of the moon. The cycles of the moon illustrating oscillations between abundance and dearth. I'm not so erudite. So when I looked at the tortillas, I thought, I wonder what our ancestors ate. And according to the internet, they ate a paleo diet, food that is obtained by hunting and gathering. So no marshmallows. Sounds dreadful. And since everything is in context of today's topic, it's important to recognize that hunter-gatherers didn't have our sense of scheduling. Neither did their prey. So for example, this auroch, which is an Eurasian auk, this prey isn't going to prance in front and say, oh, hi, time for me to become your meal. It didn't work that way. So hunting variables are subtle and they are borderline impossible to assess with finality. So there isn't some Paleolithic daily schedule, shoot an aurochs at 11, clean, cook, and serve it for lunch at 12. It doesn't work that way. And so our first series, which was the Silk Road, so I thought perhaps I can choose the Mongols to investigate the relationship of time and food. In the 12th and the 13th century, the Mongols, led by Genghis Khan, conquered most of the lands of Europe and Asia. His cavalry were hungry and needed to eat on the go. So they would scrape cuts of meat off sheep and form them into patties. These patties were put under their saddles while they rode. The constant jarring between the seat and the back of the horses tenderized the meat and was eaten by the soldiers raw, literally fast food. So Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, invaded a vast part of Asia, bounded by the Caspian Sea, the Ural Mountains, the Pacific Ocean, and the northern borders of China and India. This region was largely unknown to European geographers who labeled it, as it says up there, Tartary. So a main character in Puccini's Turandot is named Caliph, and he was the prince of Tartary. So it's the same region. We now refer to these areas as Russia. In the 13th century, the Russians adopted their invaders' ground meat into their own dish, named the steak tartare. A modern deconstructed version. So simply put, steak tartare is a dish of finely chopped beef served raw and mixed with a number of accompaniments, but mostly egg yolk, mustard, sauces, and seasonings. During the 1600s, shipping trade opened between the Russian ports and the German port of Hamburg. The Russian steak tartare was brought to Germany. We all have a connection with Hamburg. Hamburg is where the Beatles cut their teeth. In the 1960s, they performed there for 4.5 hours each night for 48 nights. Hard day's night indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their audiences were mainly prostitutes and their clients. But Hamburg is more than the Beatles. It is also the birthplace of Brahms. During the 18th century, England experienced a surge of German immigrants, and their tartar steak immigrated also. The recipe showed up in Mrs. Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy. It was a hugely popular cookbook in both England and colonial America. Another genesis is that the transatlantic Hamburg America line served Hamburg steak between two pieces of bread to emigrants embarking to America. Either way, this Mongol inspired meal ended up in America. The 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis created an explosion in the sandwich's popularity. 62 countries and 42 states had vendors there to display their cultures to the public. Look at that, the Asian elephant. So the public had shown up in droves to experience all the novelty and the food that was being offered. Several small vendors served hamburgers, a meal from Hamburg, Germany. And this public spread the news of this fantastic sandwich to their respective hometowns and countries. That is the genesis of the hamburger, covered in 800 years, cooking with time. There are more subtle manifestations of time as cook. For example,
This one
fermentation,
has the history.
truly cooking with time. The making of soy sauce by the traditional brewing method, fermentation. The aging process allows the bean to naturally produce oil, resulting in a mellow and full taste with well-balanced aroma. And soy sauce can be right up there with really good olive oil and balsamic vinegar. For me, without time as cook making really good soy sauce, how shall we ever enjoy sushi? Or in a more familiar version, this one, I prefer unagi. Fermentation is essential for
Is
cheese,
essential.
grottos with wooden aging boards, and thyme is an ingredient for making yogurt. Thyme is the cook for all things pickled, including eggs. We all know about fast food, so I'm going to skip spending time talking about it. So, from food to drinks, and the world of alcohol is drunk with time. So, in our story of life, time manifested, we observe the underpinning of time for sustenance. So, seasonal fruits, vegetables, fermentation. So, we now move on to culture, storytelling, a tale as old as time, that last drop of the petal with Rose as a timekeeper. And Cinderella, the pumpkin being warned, don't let the clock strike midnight. And a grotesque unacceptance of time, Dorian Gray. It has a very witty line, right? A peacock in everything but beauty. In music, Quarter for the End of Time, Messiaen. But really, examples are barely needed because music, unlike a painting or other plastic arts, which are compositions in space, a musical work is a composition dependent upon time, rhythm, the one indispensable element of all music is music's pattern in time, a placement of sound in time. The unit division of musical time is called a beat, and shown here are time signatures, which are also known as meter signatures, half note, quarter note, etc. So etymologically, rhythm comes from the Greek rhythmos, which is derived from rhyme, to flow. So time, music, water, the Rhine River, all flows. Composers conceive their music and depend upon conductors and performers of the future to recreate it rhythmically. Ricardo Muti and the Chicago Symphony describe this photograph. In broad terms, the time framework of music is composed of tempo, time measure, meter, and period. Time is the very life of the music. The functional metronome came around the 18th century and was based off the average person's pulse. So it was based on the pulse. Timing has changed historically because whole notes used to be much quicker, timed with the pulse. Now the whole note is quite a long note, but it wasn't always so. Prior to the advent of clocks and watches, there were Gregorian chants, a form of unaccompanied sacred music sung in Latin, also Greek. And so these Gregorian chants absolutely have no time signatures. Its rhythm belongs to the Greek or Latin tongue and springs from the correct accentuation of the text and the dynamic quality inherent in the word grouping. So we've touched upon food, culture, so let's move on to objects to get a better understanding of how time surrounds us. Time graces objects with the patina of elegance. Strikingly so in the Eastern cultures, especially in the Japanese tea culture, perspectives of wabi sabi. Wabi is the elegance of harmony. Sabi is the sublime beauty that can only come from age. So age lends beauty to bronze and also to copper. That beautiful leathery look on copper downspouts of homes can come only with age. And the art of bonsai, to painstakingly shape a young tree to get the appearance of the majesty of time. It's utterly divine. And fashion, an object by itself. The fashion industry is wholly affected by time. I mean, simply focus on their lingo, trendy, latest collections, new season, buy now. The fashion industry uses time as an urgent pressure to make us buy. The entire QVC depends on it. Even individual items often have time signatures. So for example, the term banyan signifies 18th century Asian-inspired jacket. Spats for shoes, spatterdashers. They should bring them back. I think they look so cool. In a macro view, fast clothes nowadays parallel fast food. Clothes cheaply made to wear once or twice and then toss. Quality is sacrificed whenever one sacrifices time. And there are time signatures in mathematics as well. The mathematical term derivative, now more infamous due to the financial markets, is a tool of calculus. The derivative of a moving object with respect to time is the object's velocity or the change with time. Time and another aspect of our life, buildings, architecture. So this structure has 365 niches on its four sides for each day of the solar year. Or even more subtle, Mont Saint Michel, a tidal island. Access to and from the monastery to mainland Normandy, France, is entirely dependent on the lunar calendar because the roadway will be submerged when the tides come in. The moon has long been a determinant for navigation, for migration, for reproduction. Lunar cycles are still revered worldwide. Though modern China uses the Gregorian calendar for official purposes, like the school year, the country also uses a lunar solar calendar for more traditional customs. That's why Chinese New Year celebrations can start in late January or early February, even though the official calendar starts January 1st. It is now the Chinese Year of the Ox. Vesak, the festival commemorating the birth, enlightenment, and death of the Buddha, changes every year, as it usually takes place of the first full moon of the ancient lunar month called Vesakha, Boishakhi, which usually falls in May or early June. The moon during that time is called Bodho Purnima. Purnima means full moon. And the night signals schedule. The night blooming cereus blooms only for a single day in a year between June and July. So right off the bat, it alerts what season it is. The beautiful white flowers only open at night, and the pleasant smell of these flowers lasts till the morning. Each plant will have many flowers that bloom, but they perfume only for one day before closing forever. A life of one day. But what a beautiful day. 4 o'clock flowers. The name indicates the time of day when the plant's trumpet-shaped flowers open. The flowers open in late afternoon in response to a temperature drop. When it opens, you know it's time for tea. A circular Mayan calendar and a circular one by nature, time alerted by the blooming of flowers. This poem captures time felt through the vitality of nature. How well the skillful gardener drew of flowers and herbs this dial knew, where from above the milder sun does through a fragrant zodiac run. And as it works, the industrious bee computes its time as well as we. How could such sweet and wholesome hours be reckoned but with herbs and flowers? The poem's sentiments captured in 1751 in the designs by Carl Linnaeus upon studying the opening and closing of flower petals of different species. Another flower clock that illustrates these physical rhythms and can be used to tell time. Moon dials are timepieces similar to a sundial and is only accurate on the night of the full moon. Advanced moon dials can include charts showing the exact calculations to get the right time, as well as dials designed with latitude and longitude for some of them. Moon dials are very closely associated with lunar gardening, so for the night blooming plants. And some comprehensive gardening books may mention moon dials. So from daily prediction to seasonal, Hanami, the Japanese flower viewing festival. Spring alerted by the blossoming of cherry or plum blossoms.
Okay.
Or cyclical ones.
Scott,
It's most timely now,
you're on a call?
2021, the year when the
Okay, no
cicadas are
problem.
scheduled to emerge.
Excuse
Yes,
me,
Shelma?
Shelma. Shelma,
Yes.
excuse me. Could you remind everyone to mute, please?
Yes, would people please mute yourselves? I don't automatically mute
dear.
people because sometimes people have questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Betty. So the cicadas have a 13 or 17-year cycle. Comets alert us to cycles as well. An obvious one being Halley's Comet. Its 75 or 76-year orbit coincided with Mark Twain's birth and death. Now, time is an experience in indigenous cultures and is reflected etymologically. I was born in Calcutta, India, and so Bangla, pronounced Bengali, is my vernacular. And so the term Godhuli is defined as the time of the setting sun, when the cows which had gone out for grazing return home. The Godhuli has a very similar meaning in flavor to the English term gloaming, which means twilight. But Godhuli, to my Bengali mind, is conflated with the swoony longing for the formless. In Bolivia, the Western calendar is useless to the mind of the indigenous community because, to paraphrase, a calendar doesn't tell you when to fish. Nature's schedule is written by light, by temperature, by the winds. One learns over time to read that schedule. To the Kaluki people of Papua New Guinea, birds herald time. The friar bird, and the butcher bird announce morning, and bird songs of different species in the afternoon tells the children to return to their families. Island communities marooned in isolation embody Da Vinci's proverb, simplicity is the most elegant. Ocean, which themselves are an image of eternity, and the word current applies both to the flow of time and tide. And the moon affects both, and that is well documented. And this results in amazing biological rhythms. Oysters, which open their shells to eat and spawn, have lunar rhythms. Oyster valves are significantly more open during new moons and more closed when the moon was full. The oysters can tell the difference between the first quarter moon and the third quarter moon and are significantly, by almost 20%, more open in the latter, the third quarter moon. The marine chameleon, seahorses. This beauty is the pygmy seahorse. Male seahorses give birth around the full moon, taking full advantage of the bigger tidal range. We are time beings. Quite a loaded sentence and absolutely true. Even the prosaic physical, all our cells in the body are replaced every 7 to 10 years, except for brain cells. And in terms of understanding of time, the indigenous and endangered tribe of the Andaman Islands are sublime. They have a scent, a perfume calendar. The fruits and the flowers of the tree, the smell of the sea determines time, seasonally, daily. Alive to nature, she schedules them. I am sure those of you who've been to Florida or in other parts of the world where you have citrus trees, citrus blossoms alert you to the advent of spring. It's just marvelous. Going slightly east from the Andaman to Sri Lanka, ceremonies are often a deep exchange between humans and time. Here is a picture from the Isala festival. It is the largest festival that coincides with Poya days. So Poya indicates full moon. Every full moon is an official monthly holiday in Sri Lanka. How civilized. So if there's a blue moon, that means there's a second full moon in the calendar month, one gets not 12, but 13 days off in a year. So if you go to Sri Lanka, check the lunar calendar to determine what is open to visit. Esala Perehira, which is a procession that lasts for 10 days, is the festival of the tooth of the Buddha. It's a relic festival, is a relic celebration. And so the Western world celebrates relics too, Chartres Cathedral with the Veil of St. Anne. But effectively, all this festival spins around and is dependent on the lunar cycle. The West has historically acknowledged seasonal time through almanacs. Almanacs were, and I guess still are, used for several purposes, such as predicting astronomical events, forecasting weather patterns, and making planting recommendations for farmers. They contain factual information such as the time of sunrise and sunsets, as well as trivia and folklore. So, for example, according to the folklore, plants that are sown in the few days before a full moon become stronger and more productive. The moon gardeners claim that the gravitational force of the full moon affects the level of groundwater in the soil, just as it does to the level of the oceans. Waxing phase are thought to stimulate leaf growth. So almanacs appeared in America within a single generation of the first English settlements. Publishers in Philadelphia later produced almanacs that were read all over the colonies. The most popular of these was the Poor Richard's Almanac, which was written and edited by Benjamin Franklin. And though often beautiful, clocks divide our sense of time. It empties time of grace and generosity by separating moments from the past and the future. By making moments distinct, they're almost isolating the moments. And few things are as impersonal and faceless as digital clocks. The stark and severe message of Metronome's climate clock, plastered on the side of a building in Union Square in New York, this digital clock is counting down the seconds that are left in the carbon budget. the amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted, whilst we still have a 67% chance of keeping the world under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. When this picture was taken, it's stating that 7 years, 103 days, and 15 hours are left before we run through our total carbon budget at current rates of emission. Metronome is a public artwork, an investigation into the nature of time. It contemplates time, geological, solar, lunar, daily, hourly, and momentarily, revealing the fractions of seconds in the life of a city and of a human being. So, capturing the essence of a being through the viewpoints of politics and religion, which historically overlap, is the oldest astronomical clock still in use in Prague's old town hall tower. Crowds throng to watch how it chimes the hour, an experience that lasts just about 45 seconds. Dizzying on multiple levels, not the least theologically with its political undertones, one can climb to the top and get a spectacular view of Prague. The clock completes, it was completed over years. I think it started around 1410. And according to the Czech legend, the original craftsman was apparently blinded so that he could not recreate another similar clock in another city. Consequently, this blinded clockmaker threw himself into and broke the mechanism of his creation, stopped time for both himself and his creation. Almost a medieval planetarium, the astronomical clock shows the position of the sun and the moon, the zodiac ring. The calendar dial contains the names of 365 saints and church holidays, with the archangel Michael pointing to the top of the dial. The figures around the main clock associated with vices, starting with the one on the extreme left, I'm going to point now, this one right there, holding a mirror, represents vanity. His neighbor holding a bag of coins represents greed. On the far right, adjacent the skeleton, holding the musical instrument mandolin, thereby representing, earthly pleasures. That figure represents lust. With an hourglass in his hand, personifying death, the skeleton rings the death knell at every hour, for whom the bell tolls. And during those times, in those centuries, and this is an example from England, astrological and ecclesiastical calendars were often combined. Church was state, the most powerful entity. So BCE, CE, so CE is current era. It used to be known and is also known as AD, Anno Domini. So all of these timings are based on religion, on Christ. And so when you put that in mind, we go back to the clock, when the skeleton chimes the hour, I'm going to point the upper windows of the clock part and the walk of apostles begin. All 12 apostles parade in honor of the one who sets the beginning of time per their religion, Christ. Religion was omnipresent, or actually is, I suppose. Even the utensils, these are called apostle spoons. This is one of St. James, made by the German silversmith J.D. Skleisner. As you may know by now, I love researching, and discovered his bookplate. Charmingly enough, it said Carpe diem, seize the day. Good advice. It leads us to one who more than just seized the day, seized an entire month. Julius Caesar. I should spell his name Seizer. Kidding. This coin face on the left is that of Brute, also known as Brutus, who was one of Caesar's assassins. Brutus had commissioned this gold coin 2 years after Caesar's death. Hence, on the right in the reverse, you see the Ides of March, March 15th, the day that Caesar was killed. Fun fact, though, Caesar had earlier pardoned some of the people who eventually murdered him. Quite a bad timing for the pardons, don't you think? And contrary to popular belief, thanks to Shakespeare's play, he didn't say et tu Brutus. He most likely, this is Caesar, spoke Greek and is reported to have actually said Kai Su Teknon, which is Greek for you too, my child. In terms of time, the Egyptians had been inspired by the Sumerian calendar. The Romans copied the Egyptians. Lunar based, the original system caused an 11-day gap between the calendar and the seasons. The Egyptians had solved the problem by adding 5 days of parties at the end of the year. What an elegant solution. So, etymologically, octo, as in octopus, refers to 8, yet October is the 10th month. Similarly, Decem, as in 10, for example, decimal, but December is the 12th month, not the 10th month. And it's not like the Romans didn't know Latin, it's just that the original Roman calendar had 10 months only. Caesar came into power and he adjusted the cultural calendar. Quite a power move, don't you think? To set people's calendars according to your own schedule. He who controls time controls power. That theme repeats, as we will find out. So the Julian calendar was proposed by Julius Caesar in 46 BCE, before current era, and was put into practice starting January 1st, 45 BCE. By 8 BCE, 2 months were added to the Roman calendar: July for Julius Caesar, August for his nephew Augustus. It was very close to the actual length of the year, but was still found to drift. And by 1582, it had drifted a full 10 days from the actual date. So 1500 years later, on October 4th, 1582, that was the last day of the Julian calendar. To sync to the Gregorian calendar, 10 days were skipped, making the next day after October 4th, October 15th. Pope Gregory III introduced the Gregorian calendar in 1582 via a papal bull because the Julian calendar was becoming inaccurate, especially in the calculation of the day of Easter, which was moving away from the spring equinox. The equinox, even in those times, came around March 21st. And so this is the papal bull, at least a picture of it, a papal bull being a pope's edict, inter gravissimas, effectively saying in the gravest concern. This was introduced on February 24th, 1582, to advance the date by 10 days. So from October 4th, leap into October 15th. And the Christian world adopt this new calendar in 1582. Well, technically, only the Catholic world in the beginning. Initially, there were issues with its adoption elsewhere, with Protestants rejecting it because they considered it a papal plot to silence their movement. Eventually, Protestant countries accepted the new system by 1700s, with Great Britain and her colonies adopting it formally in 1752. So it took a while. Orthodox countries were even more resistant in taking the new calendar, and it took a few centuries to finally embrace the new system. Greece was one of the last Christian Orthodoxy country to do so in 1923. And even so, national churches in Orthodox countries have never fully accepted the Gregorian reforms. Y2K, we all remember it, the beginning of the new millennium, year 2000. But you see, it's not technically the year 2000, it's simply a year 2000, because the Christian Gregorian year 2000 is the Buddhist 2544, the Muslim 1420, and the Jewish 5760. Time is not absolute. So moving forward a few more centuries, Great Britain has developed into a powerhouse by now, and her strong navy, merchant marines, fuels her growth. For political and economic prowess, the line of longitude is determined. The prime meridian is the meridian at which the longitude is defined to be 0 degrees. So it divides the Earth into the eastern and western hemispheres. By international convention, the prime meridian passes through the Royal Observatory, and choosing a time zone for your country depends on a combination of geographical and social factors. So why is France an hour ahead of the Greenwich Mean Time, GMT? Even though, as can be seen, the prime meridian passes through France. So although France lies along the same longitudinal lines as Greenwich itself, French politicians had decided to follow their neighbors and adopt Central European Time, so it's GMT plus one, to help facilitate trade and communications with the majority of European countries. This geographical context is about power and money. Everything set with respect to England. Her British pound was the benchmark in the 19th and 20th century. So even today, all trade context, everything spins around that marker. Space and time are related. So in terms of navigation, measurement of time is tied to space, the longitude for trade dominance. One of the many ways time is money. That proverb itself is attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Historically, many parallels exist. Greeks define time in two ways: chronos, god of time, quantifiable time, so it's absolute and linear, measurable. And the Greek kairos, qualifiable time, god of timing. So Chronos, god of measurable time, was also god of the mint. So the Roman treasury was attached to his temple. Once again, symbolically, time is money. Look at the city of Geneva, city of watchmakers and a city of bankers. Clocks are very important for commerce. Architecturally, city centers had clocks, and many of the laypersons, many of them were illiterate, learned to count by counting with the clocks. The visible clock towers with its clanging bells were an ever-present reminder of the church. So in feudalism, 13th and the 14th century, money was associated with land and livestock. Land wasn't simply viewed as passive real estate. It was about food production. So land was a steady plenty of eternal crop cycles and livestock. And livestock is where we get the trade term stock market. Money is linked to time, movement. Value comes from money's circulation, not from its hoarding. So from the Latin word to run, correre, we get the term currency. I think it's curere, not correre, curere. So currency itself implies movement. So even now, look how we speak. We can buy time, steal time, spend time, save time. And on a bigger scale, wages are dependent on time. Time is essential in the stock market, in real estate, in sales cycles, in budgets, in business management, you name it, especially critical in schools. So the structure of schools itself, 1 hour periods, historically is based on factory framework, like shown here. The bells ring every hour, just as the factory bells whistle. So from the early 20th century, schools were the training ground for the factory. This is Henry Ford and his car production factory. He didn't invent the car. His factory streamlined car production, automated production, yield, another term that crossed over from the agricultural model. Livestock and yield results in today's term of stock market and yields. Ford's factory automation, effectively the production schedule, was in today's parlance a disruptor. Time is money, thereby making things faster is very beneficial financially. Now, few things can compete with the speed of artificial intelligence. Our brains seem sloth-like compared to their context of computing. This is why jobs are being replaced by computers. Business efficiency means cutting time, thereby decreasing costs. Reading charts more accurately, even medical charts, data processing for taxes, all are being replaced by computers because it saves business costs. Yesterday, I had attended a presentation on architecture that showed the potential of drones being used to clean, windows and high rises. So there's no more men or women hanging by pulleys, effectively money saving because there's even lower insurance costs. So artificial intelligence is the reason for the discussion on currently UBI, universal benefit income. You know, this is not a political statement, so it doesn't matter which way you view it, but in a grand scheme, isn't it a beautiful reinterpretation of time is money? That your life is worth something, even if you're not productive, that you matter. Though not quite the Mona Lisa, the value of creativity and time is hinted at in this photograph. So, this is a painting created by artificial intelligence. The computer created it. So in 2018, the auction house Christie's had estimated it would sell for about $7,000 to $10,000. Christie's sold the piece to an anonymous buyer for $432,000. It's almost a $500,000 painting. The real question is actually behind the scene. You have to dig a little deeper. Who gets the money? The person, or perhaps the computer who wrote the algorithm for creating the picture? Is that the creative force? Or the one who printed the picture? Where does creation start? How long was this creative process? How will pay come out? Time and money. Money and time, these are all, it went to court, it was under litigation, who's going to get the money? It's fascinating. In a supreme sense of irony, Isaac Newton, he of mathematics and optics fame and the determinant of the theory that time is absolute and linear, he was also the master of the mint, just like Kronos. So in England, this metaphorical master of time was the literal master of money. And according to him, time was an entity by itself, independent of anything else. Absolute time. Newton said that the universe was clockwork. He reduced the universe from mystery to machinery. He was wrong. That theory was adjusted by Einstein, his theory of relativity. Easy way to conjure that is when you're riding a bike, and if the bike next to you is being pedaled at the exact same speed, the spokes on the bike will look still and not a blur. Einstein's theory is no longer absolute either, because gravity warps time. The effect is most visible in the concept of black holes in space. So black holes are so dense that they pull light into the vortex, and it stops light from traveling in that straight line, that Huygens principle. So it pulls the light down. That's why they are black holes, sucks the light. So an unexpected example of relativity while our story continues. The Nourishment Project outreaches to schools worldwide, in Chicago, at the Chicago Public Schools, charter schools, and also at the University of Chicago charter schools. I'm going to now show an example from the middle school children at the Academy for Global Citizenship. This sample was from 2018, as is shown on the date up there. So we've been working with the children for a while. First, as it's shown here, they saw a video on the observatory in the Atacama Desert in Chile. And then they were asked to evaluate a stanza by the poet Robert Frost. I'm going to read to it because it might be hard to read in this not quite well lit picture, I suppose. So it says right here, poem by Robert Frost, Desert Places. They cannot see me with their empty spaces, between stars, on stars where no human race is. I have it in me so much nearer home to scare myself with my own desert places. So this is what the child's response. So this child is age 12. You can see up there, it says age 12. The child writes, and this child, his name was Rubiani. He had yet to take physics. He had written, and this is from, once again, 2018. I learned that Robert Frost used the entire poem as a metaphor. The metaphor is past and future. The future is that empty space. The stars is a reference to the past because by the time you see the light of a star, it already exploded. Well, it is true, he is correct. What we see in the night sky most likely no longer exists. It takes millions of years for the light of an object to reach us. The emanating object may not exist at this moment, even though the light is being seen by us. This child saw that in the poem by Robert Frost. Robert Frost himself may not have realized the scientific potential of his work, relativity. So 86,400. That is the number of seconds in a day. And an atomic clock compartmentalizes time even further, and we find atomic clocks in satellites. So they break it down to less than nanoseconds. And initially I thought, so what? How is that relevant to us? Well, since time and space are related, the atomic clock is what helps compute distances correctly on our GPS system. So without that level of precision, the Google Maps on our iPhones or any phone that you use would be meaningless. And now, for a memorable example of relativity, behold, a fig. So technically, a fig is a cluster of tiny inverted flowers encased by a very hard skin. There are about 750 species of figs, each of which has a particular fig wasp as its pollinator. The life cycle begins when a female wasp bores into a fig and lays her eggs inside the fig. Yes. And then the wasp dies. Don't worry when you eat a fig. There are ficins in the fig that'll just disintegrate the body. But anyway, moving on. When the larvae hatch, the wingless male larvae fertilize the females, effectively fertilizing their sisters. This is almost like a Wagner opera. So the female wasps mature, comes out of this hole that the brothers have created before they died, and they fly out delivering pollen from one fig to the other with them to fulfill the life cycle. Figs and wasps need each other to complete their unique life cycles, and this is obligate mutualism. When a newly hatched female bores out of its fig, it has 48 hours to get to a male fig to start the pollination process. 48 hours. 48 hours is what was given to the Serbs to hand over the Serbian activist who had assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 29, 1914. Within a month, World War I commenced. Austria, Hungary, Germany versus Russia, France, etc. 48 hours. So 48 hours to start a new life cycle for a fig wasp and for our species to start a war. Leap forward into history, 13 significant days. In this photograph from 1962, on the right is US Ambassador Adlai Stevenson at the United Nations describing aerial photographs of launching sites in Cuba. And so for 13 days, the world waited with bated breath as Russia, Cuba, and the United States played bluff about nuclear war. So I'm going to ask you politely, please look at me. I just blinked. And in those milliseconds, the pygmy shrew's heart beat 5 times. The hummingbird beat her wings 20 times. The Earth danced through space 4.6 miles, all relative, especially in the emotional aspect of time. Gravity warps time, and in the gravitational field of love, surely, as an example, the opera Rosenkavalier by Richard Strauss. I'm going to point, the clock is essential to the story. You know, actually more than Strauss, I'm drawn to the dramatist Hugo von Hofmannsthal. I'm amazed at what he comes up with in his librettos. This is during Viennese pre-First Wall intellectual scene, and in the story, the central character, Marceline, who's the wife of the field master, is having an affair with a much younger man, Octavian. This is not her first nor her last affair. She fears, even though the boy is smitten with her, she fears his youth will make him eventually reject her, and so she wants to preemptively offload him. And before the end of the first act is a famous stop the clock aria. Stopping time to prevent aging. It's quite a meditation. And time, how strangely does it go its way? First we are heedless. Lo, 'tis as nothing. Then of a sudden waking, and we feel naught else but it. All the world tells of it, all our souls are filled with it. No face but shows mark of it, no mirror but shows it us. All my veins feel it throbbing, and there, twixt you and me, it flows in silence, trickling like sands in the hourglass. Sometimes I arise at the dead of the night and take the clocks and stop them. Everyone. So Marceline sings this, and in the opera, her age of the character is 32, a sign of her times and ours. Isn't that the beauty industry's offering? The chimera of erasing time from our face. A projected $83.2 billion industry peddling the false narrative that beauty is youth. It is not. Beauty graces all ages, not just youth. So this is a picture of a minor princess from India, Gayatri Devi, and one can confidently state more elegant, more alluring with age. Her picture is on the right. Her younger version is picture, photograph is on the left. But you can see the wrinkle-free banality of yesteryears. She's just amazing to see on the right. That is true also for Audrey Hepburn. And it's not the makeup or the glamour. On the right, she is with her son. Because beauty surpasses all this. She's radiant with joy. Beauty is absolute. It is not time-bound. There's a false narrative that one removes age to get beauty. It's totally not right. It's false. And our science experiment has progressed. We've observed time in its myriad manifestations: food, culture, religion, labor. What is the conclusion? So this picture that was sent included a line from Emily Dickinson's poem, of which 2 stanzas are. I'm going to read them now. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste. And I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. So all our observations included all sorts of labor and leisure. One aspect trumps the unavoidable time transformation, death, transcending time into the realms of eternity. And now art, human-made art, not the AI declared art, will help illustrate our conclusion. The first of 2 paintings is Meleager and Atalanta, the painter Jacob Jordaens. His Atalanta isn't the classical delicate beauty. Originally an assistant to Rubens, Jordaens didn't know any aristocrats, so he painted the ordinary Flemings he knew of, hefty peasant type attractive. And in the Greek story, Meleager was the prince of the country, and a savage boar was ravishing the land. He summoned all the heroes to conquer it. The person who won was Atalanta. And in this scene, Meleager rewarded the trophy to her. The jealous, defeated ones are furious that a girl should take the prize and are trying to take it away from her. And those are his uncles. Meleager is furious, reaching for his sword. He will kill his uncles, and his mother will eventually see to it that he is killed in return. All Greek to me. But in the painting, look at her. Here is the prince defending her. He's not looking at her. She sees nothing but him. Time has stopped for her by the gravitational force of love. Jordan captures the eternity of that moment. Love, the living eternity. love in all its aspects, not just human love. And to demonstrate that, I give you Titian. He was in his 80s when he painted this. It was unfinished, it doesn't matter. Late Titian is great Titian. The flaying of Marsyas. I must tell you, this painting makes me weep. So if I suddenly bawl, I promise not to. Forgive me. So the satyr, Marsyas, half man, half goat, had challenged the god Apollo to music, and Marsyas had lost. The condition was that the victor may do anything he wants with the defeated. And so Apollo decided to flay him alive, thereby strings him up as an animal to be butchered. And like all great art, interpretations vary. This is just one. Here is the butcher doing his job. Marsyas's fellow satyr tries to help, to ease his suffering, brings water, the eternal quality of kindness. Here is a child, unable to comprehend, looking at us, likely representing any child looking for guidance. Help me. Help me understand this seeming horror. Or perhaps this represents a budding artist or a musician saying, look, this is what greatness demands, courage. We see a young artist aspiring for greatness. And here is Apollo flaying Marsyas, but almost lovingly, gently. So satyrs were great musicians in mythology. Marsyas had challenged the gods, not as ego, but as an offering. Here, I offer my very best to you. As the god of music, Apollo recognized his true devotee. His flaying of Marsyas by his own hands is almost an act of supreme love and respect and honor. Because look at Marsyas. He's not even registering any of this. His eyes are alive, but it's way beyond all of this, that he gave his all. And here, the supreme observer, the crowned artist, said to be a portrait of Titian himself, he's wondering, did I give my all? The psychological stripping of self to be utterly vulnerable, and that can only come from courage. And the root word of courage from the French word cour means heart. Did I give my all, win or lose, in that spiritual offering, that supreme love, passion for life? One transcends time. And Titian must have felt that he did, because that's why he could paint this portrait of vulnerability, susceptible to time, to death, yet love carries one into eternity. A transcendence of time through a life well lived. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to start the architecture series, Edifices Complex, the first one being places of learning. So it'll be all about libraries and universities. And next month, it is adornment in praise of mollusks, the birth of a pearl. I hope you consider joining us. And as always, it is our, like we said in the beginning, it was our first year anniversary. I would like your blessings and continue on to a second year. And I hope, as always, that you find joy in these and in your life always. I'm going to stop sharing now.